This is Vincentt Sutton II interviewing Larry Lancaster for the HBCU Radio Preservation Project. It is 1:07 p.m. on December 5th, 2025. This interview is being recorded at WEAA in Baltimore, Maryland. So to start off, can you please state your full name and your relationship to WEAA?
Larry Lancaster, and I'm an on-air personality.
Thank you, Larry. Can you tell me when and where you were born?
Baltimore, Maryland.
So born and raised in Baltimore.
Yes, sir.
Tell me about growing up here in Baltimore.
Oh man, it's nothing like it. You know, I always say Baltimore is a small town with big city issues, but it does have a charm to it. But I also like about Baltimore is there are pockets of many different cultures and communities. Like you could be in an affluent community in one block and then turn the corner and it's Beirut. So it's something for everybody. It's a very tough town. I grew up in the toughest part of Baltimore. I grew up in Douglas Projects, Lafayette Projects. I actually was born in Flag House. And I've seen a lot of crime, a lot of drugs, a lot of disparity, but I still see the beauty in the city.
Walk me through growing up in those areas. You said you saw a lot of crime and drugs. How do you ground yourself in a community where you see a lot of that?
Well, growing up, let me see. I'm 56. So I grew up at a different time where even if you grew up in the hood, you still felt safe. Even with the crime and all the things that were going on, if you weren't a part of that, you didn't have to be. You know, it wasn't a whole lot of innocent bystanders going on. It was basically, if you looked for trouble and you wanted trouble, then that's what you got. So I grew up at a time where the drug dealers kept the kids away from certain things. You know, if people respected adults, just by virtue of you being an adult. Like a cat could be robbing you, and if he saw Miss Gloria come out the house, you know, they would both pretend like nothing was going on until she went past. That's the kind of era I grew up in. And then around the early 80s, that with crack, that kind of changed. Of course, we all know what the crack epidemic did to just about every major city in the country. And then once the drug dealers realized that teenagers weren't going to jail for selling drugs, they start recruiting them, where before they kept them away from that. Yeah. So, just some major events just changed everything. Yeah. And so once the crack ravaged the communities where people no longer function, because drugs were always around. Like people had heroin addicts. You know, heroin addicts would keep jobs for years. They would boost. You know, they were an intricate part of the community. But when crack came, then people was going in your stereo. You know, it was breaking in cars. They were selling their children. So it really had a very detrimental impact on the community. And a lot of it was an important part because a lot of the culture, a lot of the morality really changed at that moment.
What's your family dynamic in that space?
Well, my family dynamic pretty much stayed the same because the biggest impact to my family was, you know, we had mental illness in my family. So my mom was a paranoid schizophrenic, and so we were really dealing with that. My uncles, they kind of dibbled and dabbled in the drug scene, my cousin, but it really didn't have a major impact on my family the way it did some other families. Mm-hmm. Our major battle was mental illness. So I had an aunt who was a manic depressive. My mother, as I mentioned, was a paranoid schizophrenic. So, you know, we grew up with that. And really the things were normal. So if things are normal to you, you don't really see them as issues. It's just what you deal with. Yeah. I really didn't realize how crazy my upbringing was until I moved away and I went in the military, you know, and at the age of 19. Was a Persian Gulf veteran, traveled the world, and then you look back and like, yo, that stuff wasn't normal at all, you know. But to me, getting on the elevator in a high-rise project building, seeing adults try to revive somebody from, you know, that was just a typical day. Yeah. So, you know, my friends standing around shooting the dozens and cracking on each other. And then we hear gunshots, and we could kind of detect how close the gunshot was because we heard them so much. Yeah. So he's like, oh, that was close. Maybe we should duck. Or that was over there. So, we're good. So you just kind of manage those things. And growing up that way, it makes you tough. It gives you street sense. It gives you a certain confidence that you could take on and handle anything.
In another interview, you spoke to the mental health issues of your mom, not so much your aunt, but you felt like you started using comedy as a means of, here's my defense.
It's actually how I became a stand-up comedian because, growing up in that neighborhood, which is a tough environment, people, they don't mince words. So if you have any weaknesses, people will bring it out. They're going to bring it up. They're going to try to exploit it. So my weakness was my mom because she was known as the crazy person in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So the kids would crack on me, and I had to become very quick at getting back at them. And so it started out as a defense mechanism, and it developed into a skill and now a profession. So that's how that thing happened.
So how do you develop, particularly as a youth, that skill set, that muscle of comedy?
Well, it's all we did. It's how we passed the time away. Yeah. And like I said before, a lot of my friends start getting into the drug game. We would just hang out. We played sports. We fought. People, I grew up in a time where you and the guy could fight, and then the family members would stand and watch and make sure it was fair. And then, all right, now hug, shake hands, and then you guys finish playing. Once the drug game came, then that changed. Start shooting at each other, start killing each other. But I grew up in the time almost before that transition. Yeah. So I got to see both sides of it. But we stood around, we cracked on each other. And people who grow up in very tough conditions have very healthy senses of humor. And so because that's how you cope. And so everybody I was around was very funny. My family was funny. It's just that I grew up in that, and then it's kind of like if you grow up in a family full of boxers. Everyone can fight, but then there's always one who comes out a little better than everyone else, and I was that person. Yeah. So I just was really good. I could look at somebody, I could look at you up and down for a few seconds, and then I got you. And then the other thing, too, is when I got so good at it that people actually wanted me to talk about them. Like, it was entertainment for them. They would pick a fight with me just so I could start cracking on them. Like, a guy would throw out something about me, and they would all stand around just to, I actually was doing stand-up comedy before I actually started doing it professionally because I was performing and entertaining my friends. I went to Poly. And so we had to catch 2 buses to get back home. The school kids would wait to get on my bus. I would entertain the entire bus, the whole ride downtown. So I was actually getting that muscle in. But it was an outlet for me. Yeah. I didn't know I was doing stand-up comedy. I just noticed if I say something funny, then people notice me. People laugh. People like you. So it was a drug to me. And I remember my first time making the class laugh. I was in 3rd grade. And I don't even remember what I said. I just remember the reaction from the entire class. And so everyone was my friend that day. And it was like a high for the first time. And I spent my whole life trying to get that high back.
In chasing that high, did you continue 3rd grade being?
Oh, yeah. That was it for me. That was it. I was always the funniest person in the room. Even in a room full of other funny people, I always kind of rose to the top. I always was a little different, but I also studied comedy. Mm-hmm. Like, I grew up in a household where I was the oldest of all my siblings. So I was more like the parent because as my mom had mental illness, she was gone all the time. So TV was my babysitter. Yeah. I watched all the Norman Lear sitcoms. I watched Maude. I watched Alice. I watched the Jeffersons. I watched even sitcoms that black people generally didn't watch. I watched Taxi. I studied comedy from the late night shows like Mike Douglas, where they would have a guest comedian on. I studied these guys and watched their delivery, not necessarily to emulate it, but it just intrigued me. The same way people like watching their favorite athlete, You know, I liked watching comedy. It was just a pacifier for me.
Yeah.
And I also grew up on radio because I was left in the house by myself. So when the TV went off, all you had was radio. So I also grew up at a time before they had urban radio. So you had to listen to soft rock. You had to listen to Helen Reddy. You had to listen to all these different artists. So it impacted my cultural gumbo, so to speak.
You mentioned radio. What else was playing in the house? You said you were listening before urban radio became a thing. At what point did you start to hear what is now considered black music?
Well, you heard black music on the white stations. Like if an artist got big enough, then they would play their music on there as well, like Fifth Dimension, Dionne Warwick, Lou Rawls, and you heard that also with the Eagles and Steely Dan. So you got a nice mix of music. It wasn't really a separation then. And then around, I would say, late 70s, like 78, 79, you start hearing the AM stations come on, and that's when you start hearing the black radio. You start hearing WWIN and WEB radio, and that's kind of where the separation started to begin, and you started hearing urban music. That was in its infancy, at least for me.
You mentioned 77, 78, being here in Baltimore. When do you start to hear WEAA?
Well, WEAA, I didn't hear WEAA until I was basically an adult. I didn't hear WEAA till I was probably in my 20s. And it was like, and because, by that time, urban radio was a thing. It was a big deal. You had 92Q, you had 95.9. And then when you kind of they started sounding formulaic because, they started, you go in any city, basically all urban radio kind of sounds the same. Mm-hmm. So then when you get a little older and you want to hear something different like jazz music or things like that, then that's when older people started kind of turning you on to, hey, check this station out. Even for the talk, the different, listening to the talk shows where they were talking about things that impacted our community. And I always was a student of that as well. Even at a young age, I would listen to 60 Minutes as a child. I was listening to Meet the Press as a child. I always wanted to inform myself of world issues. So as an adult, of course, that continued, and that's when I started thirsting for that type of thing in radio, and that kind of brought me to WEAA. And I was just a fan of the different shows that they would have because you heard things that you couldn't hear on the 92Q. You couldn't hear on a 95.9. So that was my first love affair with, not even necessarily musically. That came a little later with the jazz and the alternative music that you wouldn't hear on the regular radio stations. So that's when I started falling in love with WEAA.
Nice. Before we get fully into your WEAA journey, I want to go back. You went to the military.
Yeah.
One, I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Two, what drew you to go that route versus college?
Well, I was a young, restless kid. I still had the streets in me because really I had moved out of the projects when I was like 15 with my dad. So when I was 14, my grandmother raised me, again, because my mother had mental illness and she really wasn't the best parent. So my grandmother took me on and became my legal guardian. And at about the age of 12 or, 11. And then at 14, I realized, I need a man. My father was always in my life, too. He would come and pick me up on the weekends. Holidays, I would go and visit his side of the family. He always was there, always took care of me, always provided for me. So I didn't have that situation where a lot of other kids had where they didn't know their dad and their dad wasn't around. My father was always a phone call away. So that also impacted my life. Like I didn't get mixed up in drugs, even though a lot of my friends did, because I always knew. One phone call from my dad, so someone was there. And I had a lot of aunts and uncles. I was really raised by a village.
Yeah.
So when I became, I think, 16, I called my dad up and said, Dad, I'm ready to come and live with you. And he came and got me, and I lived with him. And he was a Vietnam veteran. But I was going back to the projects every day. And so that was in my system. And I was like, how can I, break away from this? How can I see another part of the world without, because we don't have money to go backpack through the Swiss Alps like, white people do, go through Europe until I find myself. So the military was it for me. So I joined the military, and they would come to our high schools and recruit too. So I took the ASVAB, I scored very high on it, and they recruited me. And I told the recruiter, I want to work in computers, because at that time, computers was like, you could see it being the wave of the future. The computer was about big as this room, but we didn't have laptops and all that kind of stuff then. And he said, I got the perfect job for you. He put me in field artillery with fire direction. And that's how, because they always tell you, recruiters lie to you, they're biggest liars. They're basically car salesmen in uniform. And that's how I went in the military, and I was in multiple launch rocket systems. So that was and I got to see the world, I got to travel and get away from my little slice of Baltimore, and it opened my mind up, because that's really how we get into that hood mentality. It's not necessarily where you live, but because that's all you see, your mind, the way of thinking is very small and limited.
I want to know, making that shift from Baltimore to the military, do you keep your sense of humor?
Oh, yes. I was known as the Joker. That's what they called me in basic training, AIT, all through my military service. And I guess they got the character from Full Metal Jacket, one of those war movies. Yeah. And there was a guy in there named the Joker. So that all the guys, even the sergeants, start calling me the Joker. They actually would call me up, like when we were out in the field doing exercises, because I had got such a reputation for being funny. The drill sergeants would call me up and entertain the troops while we were on break. They would say, take a 15-minute smoke break or whatever, and I would entertain the guys. I would do impressions of the drill sergeants, and I would tell like stock jokes and different things, and I was actually learning to be a stand-up comic in real time. Yes. So that was, a school for me.
Definitely a different school of art.
Right.
Than
it wasn't in a comedy club. It wasn't in a stage. It was actually entertaining people and hardships. And even through Persian Gulf, we were at war. Yeah. And I remember my sergeant telling me, like, hey, man, I really appreciate you keeping us laughing, like we're away from our family, our loved ones, our wives, and you just made this experience a lot better just with your sense of humor. And that's when I realized, like, this is really serious, like it's a ministry. And of course I didn't connect the dots then, but looking back on it, it really meant something to people.
Your first stand-up gig wasn't in the military. It was a high school talent show.
I had a high school talent show. Yes.
Tell me about it.
Oh, man. I decided to try it, and it's the most frightening thing ever, right? They used to have these talent shows at my high school. I went to Carver, which was a vocational school. I went to Poly first. I got kicked out of there when I actually left, and then I went to Carver, where I could study commercial art, because I'm also an artist, and I could draw really well. And so they would have these talent shows, and I said, I'm gonna, from years of people telling me I'm funny, I'm sitting around in the cafeteria cracking on everybody, just always funny. So I said, I'm gonna try it. I devised a routine, and I talked about the faculty for like 10 minutes. And a lot of the teachers were so upset with me, man. And but it was really good. I didn't win, of course, but I placed really well, and people, they weren't surprised, because they was like, this is what you do on a daily basis anyway. All my friends and family, they always say, I'm not surprised you're a professional comic because we always saw that for you, even when I didn't see it for myself.
So let's go back. 3rd grade,
Mm-hmm.
Carver,
Right.
military.
Mm-hmm.
How long did you serve in the military?
I did 3 years, 1 month.
Okay. So what's next after you come out of the military?
Well, I met a young lady. We fell in love. She was from Germany, and she actually became my first wife. So PCS, that's when, you get out of the military. I left and left her there. And we made a promise that we were going to reconnect and get married. And so I came back to the States. I got a few odds and ends jobs to earn money, and I sent for her, and we eventually got married. And one of the first places that called me was Corrections, the Division of Corrections, and I was hired at the Maryland Penitentiary, because I had a military background. And so that was like my first gig, and I did that for about 3 years. And then after that, I got hired at Baltimore County Detention Center, and I did that. And then that's when while I was working there, my wife went on vacation. I'm sorry if I'm being long-winded, but my wife went on vacation because we had a baby. She took the baby back to Germany so her in-laws could meet the baby. And a friend and I were hanging out, and we went down Fells Point on a Tuesday night. Nothing to do at this time. And we saw these people going in this club. It was called Latin Palace. And so we was like, yo, maybe there's something going on over there. Let's go over there. So we parked the car, went over there. They were having a comedy night. So the two comedians came out, and they were trying to get people to come in. And we went inside, and it was one of the best experiences I ever had. The Latin Palace was one of those huge Miami-style nightclubs where they had like palm trees inside or whatever. And they had a small crowd of like 15 to 20 people, but I really enjoyed the show. So after the show, I walked up to the comedians and said, listen, man, I want to make people feel like you guys made me feel tonight. And they said, you're in luck. We're having an open mic competition in 2 weeks. We'll give you 5 tickets, sell these 2 tickets, sell these 5 tickets, and that'll be your registration fee, and you can come back and compete. And that's what I did. So I got all my coworkers. We came down 30 deep from Baltimore County Detention Center. They came to support me because, I'm cracking on them in the break room and making them laugh. And so that was my first real introduction to professional comedy. I wasn't a professional yet, but I was on my way. I went down there, I got in the competition, and I won. And I've been doing comedy ever since.
What year was that?
That was like maybe 1999 or 2000.
So we start to get our stride, or get that stride around the turn of the millennium.
Mm-hmm.
You're cutting your teeth in comedy. You have this affinity for radio. You've been listening to WEAA. How do you get to WEAA?
Okay, now that's a whole other journey. So I grew up on radio, as I said. So I would get ready for school listening to Dennis, Randy Dennis and Gene Ross on V103. Then later, as an adult, I started listening to 92Q with the Big Fat Morning Show. So they became like, that's one thing about radio. It was always part of the black community. Mm-hmm. You could hear the music playing. You could hear the radio personalities. Even outside, people would put their radios in the window. So you didn't have to be in the house. You could be walking and hear songs, hear music, people's coming out of the radios from their cars. So that was always a part of my life, just like comedy. So I would listen to them. I would love the show. And then they used to do a lot of remotes where they were out in the community and you could go and meet them. So one of these times I went to meet them, and we just clicked right away. Mark Clark, Troy Johnson, and Marva. And we got comfortable, and I became like what you call a friend of the show. So fast forward like a year later, they were hosting a competition, and I had been doing comedy for maybe a year. They've been doing a competition, and the winner got to open up for Cedric the Entertainer. So I went down, won the competition, and they was like, yo, you got something. You're really funny. So then through that, Mark started asking me to kind of come on the show as like a personality. And then when he would go on vacation, he would ask me to sit in for him. So that was my introduction to radio, just like that. Yeah. So I would come on with the Big Fat Morning Show and sit in for Mark Clark. Like this was the #1 radio show in Baltimore. So I'm on it. Then one of the times Mark was out, we had a question of the day. And the question of the day, I can't even remember what it was, but nobody was calling. So I said, well, I'm going to go out in the hallway and I'm going to pretend I'm a caller and I'm going to answer the question. Maybe that'll spur people to call. And I did this voice. And the voice was like from the drug addicts that used to be down Lancaster Market. And I called up like, yeah, man, I'm calling up to answer the question of the day. And I did it, and it was hilarious, the banter between myself, and at the time they had gotten rid of Troy and Marvin, and it was Pork Chop and Sanjay. So I'm going back and forth with them. So, okay, think nothing of it. Mark comes back, I'm back to doing whatever I was doing. So then I get a call from Nikki, who was the program director, Nick at Night. And she said, listen, I don't know what you did when you was on, but people are calling up asking for that character that you did. And I was like, what character? I didn't even remember. She was like, you did I said, oh. So then that became a part of the Big Fat Morning Show, and it blew up. People loved the character. So I had to get a character a name. I just called him Gerard from Lexington Market. And I would do, I would call up, ask them what the topics they're talking about. I would write some stuff real quick, and then I would call up, and then we would just do the stuff over the air just like that. And so Mark Clark gets fired because, the radio started going into syndication. They got fired while they still were the #1 radio show in the market. It wasn't like their numbers had dipped or anything like that. Yeah. It's just that Radio 1 had made the decision to put Ricky Smiley on because they could syndicate. They start putting personalities on, and that were known in other cities. And it's actually cheaper for them because the sponsors they was paying Mark like $200,000 or something, from the station, where they could just get a little bit from the advertisement and pay Ricky Smiley millions of dollars. So radio changed like that. Yeah. And so then I was out. And then what happened was, a friend of mine was booking comics to be on McKell show on WEAA. The comics they were using, they were mainstream comics. They weren't very funny on the air. They were funny doing stand-up, but they didn't have the personality to be on the air. So he asked me to come in, sit in with McKell. I come in one time, they liked me, and they kept asking me to come back. So now I'm just a reoccurring guest. Then I became a part of the morning show. And the director liked me, and she put me on my own show for a Saturday morning. And so that's how I got to be on Throwback Saturdays with WEAA.
I really love that journey, particularly your ability to translate your voice from stand-up to radio. Is it difficult to make that transition from stage to radio without the audience being right there?
Well, there is an audience. They're just not in front of you. Yeah. So the way I do that is first of all, like I said, I grew up on radio. I had plenty of great examples of what a radio personality should be and sound like to connect with the audience, because I know what made me connect. So I do radio with the perspective of the listener. When I'm listening, what do I want to hear? What conversations do I want to, what interests me? What music do I like to hear? And so that's how I program my show for 2 hours. I keep the listener in mind. And so because radio is a dying medium now, everybody does playlists. That's how I do my music. I do it as if it was a playlist. So any song I don't like, I don't play it. I only play the music that I like, because that's what we do with our playlist. You program your music on Apple or Spotify. If you listen to an album and there's 3 songs on there you don't like, you take the songs you like and throw away the other songs. That's how I program. Once I program the show for a mood, we stay in that mood for 2 hours. So if the mood is love songs, That's what it is. If it's gospel, it's whatever I feel like playing that week, and I think my listeners want to hear. And what I also like to do is introduce them to music that they generally wouldn't have liked, but I pick songs that even if you don't like Latin music, you'll like this Latin music song, and I'll do a playlist that way. So that's how I do the show from my years of just being a child of music and black radio. Yeah. And so it's a dream for me. But to answer your question about the comedy piece is I always just try to make sure I talk with energy. I try to talk about things that are interesting, and I try to be transparent and very honest with the audience and not lie to them, because that they can smell a fake.
You mentioned getting your own show, the Saturday morning spot, Throwback Saturday, correct?
Yes.
Walk me through that first day, that first time being on air.
It was scary. You know, I wasn't being myself, because, you know, it's like it takes a while before you be yourself doing anything. Even in a relationship, most of the time we show people our representatives. Then over the period of time, you let down your guard, you get more comfortable, the more natural you comes out. That's with anything you do. And this is one of the advice that I give young comics. Become yourself on stage. Once you become yourself on stage, you can do anything. Mm-hmm. The same way you're funny in front of your family and friends with that natural ability, and you don't have to think, it's second nature. When you can do that in front of an audience, that's when the brilliance comes out. So that's what I do when I'm on the air. I just be myself on stage in front of the audience, know that they're listening. So I program the music. I play only the things that I like to hear. I generally don't play stuff. If I hear something sonically and it doesn't move me, even if it moves other people, it's just like if you were repping a clothing line. You're more likely to do it better if you were wearing things that you actually like versus just wearing something because somebody said, I'm going to pay you to do it. So I always try to be authentic and true to what I like and myself, and it translates very well to the audience because the feedback is overwhelming.
In the same way you built that muscle as a comedian, you touched on being a child of the radio. How are you building the muscle of being a radio host?
Well, also having a responsibility to the audience, highlighting the beauty in Baltimore. So people call me up, like you could call me up and say, hey, man, I can meet you at a party. And you're like, hey, man, I'm a young brother. I'm just starting a clothing line. I'm trying to put myself out there. You know, here's my card. All right, brother, come on the show. Let's talk about it. Yeah. You know, there are so many different people who are doing beautiful things in Baltimore, people who are mentoring, people who are feeding the homeless. And I want Baltimore to hear that, to see it. We see the carjackings, we see the murders, we see everything else, but who's showing the beauty of Baltimore? And I'm not saying I'm the only one that's doing it, but I want to be one of the people who are doing that. So that's when I invite people to the show. When we take a break from the music, okay, your interview is up. Tell the people about what you got going on. Tell the people I'm an advocate for mental health. I have my own wine. You know, it runs the gamut. Yeah. And I want to introduce those people to the listening audience along with the great music. Yeah. So basically what I try to do is take radio back to what it used to be, you know, where we entertain, educate, and inform the black community.
You beat me to a point because I wanted to mention, I heard you say in another interview, we entertain, we educate, we inform. You touched on the importance of that in your show, but how do you see the importance of that for WEAA as a whole?
Well, to me, it's one of the only few places where they're doing that. And that's the beauty of public radio and why it's so important, because everything else is bought and sold. And once the dollar is your master, then you can't talk about things that may offend other people. You can't talk about things that may be great for our community, but not someone else's. See, there's a sector of society that benefits from our ignorance. They benefit from us not knowing who we are. They benefit from us not knowing the things that are going around as far as policy and how politics and all these different things will impact us as a community. So when you start talking about those things, they may shut you down. And you're wondering like, well, why can't I talk about that? Because it's not productive for them. So as long as WEAA allows me to do what I'm doing without interfering, I'm going to do it.
Now, with that, I want to shift gears and talk about WEAA as a learning lab. You've spoken to younger comics. How do you translate your talent to the students that are interested in being on radio?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have students who come in as long as they want to learn. We got an open door policy. So we turn nobody away. Anybody who wants to come, say, hey, I want to come sit in and shadow you, or how can I? We open the door to anybody. The thing that I'm finding is that a lot of young people just aren't interested in radio the way they used to be. And I don't think they understand the responsibility and the platform that it still can be, because everybody is on social media, everybody is podcasting, everybody is, and to them, old people radio is an old person's medium for them. But I'm like, what did you pick up while you was riding in the car to school when your mom was listening to different things? You picked up some stuff, didn't you? So it's like, it still has a place, and I think just like everything else, it's coming back because we're coming back to the basics. A lot of the things are being exposed. Social media is a cesspool. A lot of people are turning away from that. So I think if you just stick to your guns and do things from a sincere place, people will find you and connect with you. But I always try to tell young people, like, don't sleep on the radio. Don't sleep because you can learn how to do all the other things that you want to do from this medium. Because podcasting and all this stuff is nothing but an extension of radio. It's just that you have a visual to the radio. That's all it is. So if you can learn this and master this, it also will help you with the other things.
You've spoken to WEAA's impact. I want to get your thought or your idea on what it is. What is the importance and value of WEAA to the Morgan State community?
Again, I don't think the kids really appreciate it. Mm-hmm. I don't think they understand the value of it, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have value. The value of it is it's one of the few things that can reach outside of this campus. Think about how powerful that is. Yeah. It's a media tool. The media is very powerful. It informs the way we think. It informs how we feel about ourselves. It informs the information that we get. So this is a drum, just like in the African community where they would beat the drum and that would send messages to people far and wide. That's what this is. It's a drum. And so no matter how high tech we get, how many other things seem like it's the best thing now, you always got to come back to the basics. That's the impact and the value of WEAA, and that's what it was founded on. The call letters say we educate African Americans. And so I always try to stick with that tradition because I understand where it comes from. And so from Mr. Kwesi Mfume and to his classmates who fought to have this radio station, this is how we change the narrative. It's one of the tenets of power. Media is a very important part of that, along with an economy, along with the police force, along with politics. Media is one of those things that as Black people, we really got to take seriously, because if we rely on other people to tell our story, we're always going to not be put in the best light. And so that's why media is so important. That's why WEAA is so important, because it's one of the few places where you can get the Black experience unfiltered.
Do you see the Black experience being unfiltered as an HBCU radio station more unique than a commercial station?
Oh, most definitely. Because we're allowed to do things that we would never be able to do. Like, they would tell me what to play. I would have to play the same 5 songs or whatever, whoever was paid to do it, or whatever big conglomerate said, this is what you got to talk about. So it's more controlled. You don't have the freedom of expression like you do on the other stations. They're bigger. They have a wider reach. But for what? Because you're getting whatever they want you to hear.
What makes WEAA special to you?
Just the fact that you can get and of course it has its issues, it has its hiccups. It's not a perfect place, right? But it's better than anywhere else where you can come in, talk about the topics that are important to you and your community, and play the kind of music that people want to hear that they don't hear any longer. That's what I get from WEAA, and that's why it's important to me.
In all the things we spoke about in terms of its reach, its uniqueness, can you describe a moment when you've seen the value of the station to listeners or to the community as a whole?
Well, listeners, the one thing about the WEAA listeners, they call and they tell you, they talk to you, they're very vocal. So I've had people call us up and say, hey, man, I'm going through dialysis, and I listen to you guys while I'm going through that. I have people call me up and say, listen, man, my mom has Alzheimer's, and I'm her caretaker, so I don't get to go out, so you guys keep me company while I'm here taking care of it. When you hear these type of things, you understand the importance and the responsibility that you have. Like, to some people, this may just be a job. To some people, it may just be a means of a stepping stone to get somewhere else. But you really got to understand the impact that you have on other people.
You, as a comedian and as a radio host, do you see them as one piece of who you are, or do you see them as separate entities?
No, not separate at all. It's just a different facet of who I am. So I take them both equally seriously, and I understand that they're both a ministry. And so I approach them as such.
Nice. So I want to get to a different part. With the HBCU Radio Preservation Project, we have two sides of what we do. We do a preservation side where we're preserving the original programming and physical history. And then we have the side that myself and other colleagues work on. We interview people like yourself and others from the radio station and even the community of listeners. I think the question I'm asking, how do you feel, or how important is our work to a station like WEAA?
Well, I would say anytime you preserve Black people's history, as you can see with this administration trying to erase it, that's extremely important. And we got to stop relying on other people to take our history more seriously than we do. So it's very important that you guys preserve this and keep the history of it. It's extremely important, because without that, who else is going to do it? So how would you know about important figures? How would you know about the topics that impact the community? How would you know even about the music? We can see that history has already been whitewashed and erased. And it's very important to maintain it and to keep it. Because 20 years from now, who's to say we'll know any of this ever happened? Who's to say we'll know we had the first Black president? The same way, look at all the lies we've been believing. We thought Christopher Columbus actually discovered America. Think about how long they kept that lie, right? Think about, we didn't know that we were kings and queens and that we were the beginning of civilization, because they didn't want us to know that. Yeah. You can't disenfranchise and enslave a people mentally if they know who they are. So that's the importance of preserving history.
Do you see the work that we're doing different than just preserving history?
I don't understand. What do you mean by that?
So in the way that we're working in a two-tier way of both telling and collecting stories from people like you, but also collecting that physical material.
Oh, yeah. Those are both important, because, again, if we had someone to say, man, Christopher Columbus ain't discovered a goddamn America. What if you had that on record? Yeah. And you had 20 people interview and they could tell you, like, that's not how it went down. So that's the other part of having the artifacts and the written word and the books and all of that is fine, but it's nothing for the human experience. And that's what the two-tier aspect of it gives you. You're talking to real live people who were there, who imagine if you could talk to people during the civil rights movement who marched with Dr. King and who could tell you those stories, aside from what you read in the book, to accompany that. And they could even say, that's close to how I have him, but this is what really happened. That's very important. So, yeah, I'm surprised more people don't do that.
So getting towards the end of our interview, what I like to ask is, what is the one grain of salt that you want to leave?
Put God first, man. I think as a people, we've really gotten away from that. And we can get into who believes what, but the further we get away from God, the more trouble we get in. And it goes against our nature. We were made in the image of him. So I think that once we go back to him and go back to our nature, we're unstoppable. And people know that.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you taking the time to interview with us.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate the opportunity.